Ahoy, mateys! Welcome to Podcasts of the Caribbean, a podcast covering the world of Pirates of the Caribbean, from the theme parks to the movies and everything in between. My name is Justin Helmer, and I will be your host on this voyage through the Caribbean. It'd be too late to alter course now, mateys. Hello and welcome back to Podcast of the Caribbean. This is episode 38, and today we're going to be covering the sixth book in the Young Jack Sparrow series, which is called Silver. So as I've said on the previous 5 episodes, I highly recommend you go and listen to those episodes first because they cover the first 5 books in the series, so that way you're all caught up with everything that's happened up to this point. But just for a recap from last time, the Age of Bronze, Jack and his crew, they tried to take Tumen back to his home in the Yucatan, but his people blamed him for stealing the Sun and Stars Amulet, which his people have protected for a very long time. So Jack and his crew end up sailing to New Orleans, and they run into Madame Minuet, who is a voodoo sorceress and is trying to get the amulet for herself. And the book ended with Jack accidentally turning the city of New Orleans completely to bronze, thanks to the first gem that was put into the amulet, which was the bronze gem. And once they were about to sail back to the Yucatan, we find out that Arabella's mother, Laura Smith, is alive and well. So let's pick up right where that book left off and right where this one begins. So let's go right into Book 6, Silver. Alright, so as I said just moments ago, Arabella just realized her mother is actually still alive, and along with Left Foot Lewis as well, who of course Arabella thought she had killed with the Sword of Cortez in the 3rd book, The Pirate Chase. But when he disappeared, he actually was teleported onto the deck of Laura Smith's ship, so justice could be done by her hand, if you remember that Arabella said that to Lewis right before he disappeared in that book. And I should also mention, Laura Smith is now a pirate, because the last time Arabella had seen her, it was when she was being dragged out of the Faithful Bride by Lewis and his crew when she was a kid. So this is a lot for Arabella to process. So let's go in and listen to mother and daughter's first conversation here. So Arabella says, "I thought you were dead," she said quietly, staring at her long-lost mother. "Oh, well, I wasn't," Arabella's mother, the pirate captain Laura Smith, responded. Arabella didn't know what to say. The last memory she had of her mother were of her being dragged out of her family's pub, the Faithful Bride, by Left Foot Lewis. People dragged anywhere by pirates usually didn't show up again, ever. Arabella was shocked to see her mom alive, and also confused, and a little angry. She grew up serving pirates their ale while her dad passed out his drink every night, all without the comfort or wisdom of a mother. And now, here was her mom, suddenly back in her life again, alive and captain of her own ship. Wanting to make nice like everything was all right again, just like that. Arabella opened and closed her mouth several times, trying to think of something to say, and failing, something she was completely unused to. "Ahem," Jack said, sliding up to Arabella, hands clasped casually behind his back. For once, she was grateful for his interruptions. "Just a reminder here, mates, as captain of this here vessel, all extra-vessel communication that is from us to you, Mommy, must be authorized, sanctioned, and made by me. No members of either crew are to engage in communications except through the captain, which is me, because, well, there doesn't need to be a because, that's just the way things is." "Arabella," Captain Smith said, completely ignoring Jack. The pirate bit her lip, almost exactly like a certain first mate aboard the Barnacle, Jack noticed. She was having a hard time fighting the emotions that were threatening to overwhelm her. Apparently, motherly annoyance won out. "Arabella," her mother said again, now with a sternness in her voice and a frown on her face. "What are you doing on a boat? A barely seaworthy one at that." "Hey," Jack protested, offended on behalf of the mighty Barnacle. "In the middle of the Gulf of Mexico with sailors who are barely older than boys." "Hey," John, Tumen, and Tim, all crew members, said, also offended. "And a bloody aristocrat," Captain Smith continued. "And what is wrong with aristocracy?" Fitzwilliam demanded. "A mangy cat-like thing," Constance, the Barnacle's resident girl-turned-cat, hissed at this insult. "And a captain who is clearly mad." "Well, thank you, ma'am," Jack said, smiling. Arabella found her own voice. "I might ask you, mother," she said indignantly, "what ye are doing alive." "Whoever said I was dead, dear?" Captain Smith retorted. Oh yes, it was crazy for me to think you were dead all these years, Arabella snapped back, putting her hands on her hips. The tone in her voice made the rest of the Barnacle's crew wince, just as it had countless pirates she had put in her place over the years of the faithful bride. Considering you were forcibly taken out of my life by a pirate, and didn't so much as send a card or letter saying you were sailing the high seas, having the time of your life. And ye, Arabella continued, turning to Left Foot Lewis, pointing both her finger and her rage at him. You knew my mum were alive all along and didn't see fit to tell me. All that time, even when I was about to kill you. It's implied in the code, love, Left Foot Lewis grumbled. A pirate never gives away another. A pirate never gives away a mother, Jack asked, misunderstanding and squinting in confusion. Lewis and Captain Smith just looked at one another, confused. Arabella bit her lip. She wanted to hit something. She felt like crying, but didn't want to break down in front of everyone. And all these years, she had thought that Lewis had killed her mother. Pull up alongside us and drop anchor, Captain Smith ordered the crew of the Barnacle. You can all come aboard and we'll talk this out. Well, how about no, Jack said. What? Captain Smith demanded, outraged. It was obvious she wasn't used to being talked to in such a manner. She flipped her auburn hair over her shoulder. She looked so much like Arabella it was a little creepy. We're not about to get cozy with a bunch of pirates, Jack spat. Even if some of said pirates are related to some perfectly good first mates and sailors, you're still pirates. Arabella gave him a thankful look. I don't want to come aboard. Not until I have some time to think about things, Arabella told her mother, setting her jaw defiantly. Fitzwilliam stepped up next to Arabella, but if she thought he was coming up to her support, she was badly mistaken. Arabella, Fitzwilliam began. Captain Laura Smith is your mother, he admonished her. He took the tone of a particularly annoying know-it-all big brother. Arabella bristled. And one really must obey one's parents. It is the proper thing to do. Oh yes, just like ye properly obeyed your dad and stayed on the family plantation to marry a rich girl and raise bananas, Arabella said sarcastically. Tim Hawk, the Barnacle's newest crew member, piped up. Actually, the whole armed pirates and shiny cannons thing weighs this situation in their favor. I'll go over. Do what you will. I'm still not going over, Arabella said stubbornly. That's right, she's not, because I order her not to, Jack added, just as stubbornly. And none of you is going either, Jack said pointedly to Fitz and Tim. Two men looked at John and sighed. Whatever, he said bravely but a little tiredly. It was going to come to a fight no matter what, and it was all going to delay him going back home, returning the medallion and clearing his name. Fine, Captain Smith said with a strange smile. If you won't come to us, we'll simply need to bring you over ourselves. Jack smirked, hand to his now bronze cutlass. A chance to fight with real pirates. This was an opportunity he had been waiting for a long time. But Captain Laura Smith didn't order the cannons readied or muskets loaded. She even sheathed her own sword. Mr. Silverback, she called out. A squat, smart-looking sailor with a prosthetic, peg leg came hobbling forward. His clothes were in slightly better condition than the rest of the crew's, and his smile was definitely superior. That wasn't what drew stares from the crew of the Barnacle, however. It was the peg leg. It was made of pure crystal. Sunlight danced over it and cast bright reflections all over the decks of both ships. Tim Hawk gasped in horror and recognition. I agree, the crystal leg thing's tacky, lad, Jack said, looking at his newest crew member curiously. But not the ugliest thing I've seen on the high seas. Please, invite our guests over, Captain Smith said, grinning. Would be nothing but my pleasure, Captain, Silverback said, smiling nastily back. He held his hand out toward the Barnacle, not sure what the pirate with the weird leg was doing, but getting a general threatening feel from the gesture, Jack moved in front of Arabella, protecting her. Normally, he would never dare to do such a thing, but her mother looked pretty determined, and a mad mother is not something you want to play around with. With a quick sweep of Silverback's hand, Jack and his crew felt a tingling in their limbs. Then they disappeared. So, everyone on the Barnacle is then teleported over to Laura Smith's ship, which is called the Fleur de la Mort. And we also get introduced to this new character named Silverback, who happens to have a crystal peg leg, and a matching crystal tooth, and a cane with a crystal pommel. So this guy loves crystal, obviously. And they all happen to glow different colors whenever he's about to use the power connected to them. So we'll come back to this guy later. But we can already tell that he is going to have he has a good deal of power, and he's definitely going to be important throughout this book. We find out that he also knows Tim Hawk, who is, of course, the newest crewmate of the Barnacle from the last book, and he had been under Madame Minuit's control, but he had escaped with the crew from New Orleans at the end of the Age of Bronze. So when everyone notices that Silverback knows Tim's name, they all turn to look at him, and they see Tim is shaking his head scared. So there's obviously something that we will come to find out later. But after this, Silverback then introduces each member of the Barnacle's crew to Laura, which is strange because he somehow knows all this knowledge about them. And to do this, he closes his eyes, and all of the crystal on him begins to glow yellow. So that includes his peg leg and the tooth. Then he points right at Jack with his eyes still closed and says his name, along with the fact that he was also recently of Tortuga like Arabella. So this creeps Jack out a bit, but Silverback doesn't stop there. He then does the same thing with Fitzwilliam, Tuman, John, and Constance. And of course, Lewis is very angry to see John, Tuman, and Constance again. Now, if you remember, Constance was the one who had scratched Lewis's face, and since then he has wanted to kill all three of them. And before he has the chance to do anything, Laura stops him and tells him he is no longer aboard the Cutlass, which of course is Leftfoot Lewis's ship if you've forgotten, and he will do as she says. Now, I did say earlier the name of Laura Smith's ship, which is the Fleur de la Mort, which in French translates to Flower of Death. And this next part is hilarious because Laura makes Lewis apologize to the crew of the Barnacle, and the first time he says, "I'm sorry," like so quietly and no one can hear it. So Laura makes him say it again, like, "What's that?" And then the next time he yells, "I'm sorry!" So I find that really funny. But after this, we have a little confrontation between Lewis and Silverback. So let's go back into the book to see what happens here. So Silverback says, "Perhaps Mr. Leftfoot needs a bit more encouragement to behave," Silverback suggested. He sidled as gracefully as he could, considering his leg, up to Captain Smith's side, and rubbed his hands smarmily. "Perhaps you should lock Lewis below decks while he thinks about what he did, or some other punishment that he's likely to understand. Hang him off the railing, perhaps. Make him walk the plank, maybe." It was obvious that Silverback had no love for the dread pirate Lewis. Jack thought about how he could use that. There was that old saying, "Any enemy of my enemy is a friend of mine," but there was something particularly unsavory about Silverback. And not just how he could make people magically disappear and reappear somewhere else. He looked untrustworthy, even for a pirate. "Give me a plain old tough guy scallywag any day," Jack muttered. "Silverback does not look very trustworthy, does he?" Fitzwilliam whispered in agreement. "I have seen many others like him. Fancy clothes, snooty appearance, and all. All vile underneath," Fitzwilliam continued, before glancing down at his own silk suit and checking himself. "All that brute understands is the lock and key, and the whip," Silverback went on. This time Lewis did draw his sword. With a wordless bellow of rage, he raised it and lunged at Silverback. The smarmy sailor didn't budge an inch. Instead, he calmly raised a hand and pointed at Lewis. His crystal leg glowed an angry, fiery red. Leftfoot Lewis's sword flew from his grasp as if it were knocked by an invisible hand. It landed on the deck with a sharp clang, embedding itself in a plank. The other pirates stepped back. Leftfoot Lewis howled and pulled out his knife, gripping it strongly with both hands. Silverback raised his hand again. "That's enough!" Captain Smith roared. She strode beneath them, hands on her hips. "I'm running a pirate ship here, not a gladiator arena. Both of you go below decks until you've calmed down for a while. Mr. Reese?" A cleaner-than-usual pirate came forward. He was handsome, with clear blue eyes and a smart red bandana, and he responded with almost military precision. "Please escort them down the hatch, and don't let them up for at least 3 hours," Captain Smith said. "Aye, ma'am," Mr. Reese replied with a grin. At least 3 of his teeth sparkled gold, but they were set in an otherwise perfect row of pearly whites, and looked more dashing than dastardly. "I'm beginning to feel a lot less special," Jack said, touching his own bronze tooth. "It seems like these days everyone has one of these." While Mr. Reese led Silverback and Lewis away, Captain Smith began ordering the rest of her crew about. "You and you, make fast the Barnacle to the floor. We'll tow her for now until we figure out what to do with her. Pull up the anchor and hoist the sails. We're moving out, lads." She gave Arabella a stern look. "And we're taking you and your crew with us, young lady, whether you like it or not." So, as you can tell, the crew of the Barnacle is now essentially trapped aboard the Fleur de la Mort, and Jack gets jealous of the size of Laura's ship compared to the Barnacle. And he tells himself that someday he will have a ship like this. And of course, we know that did end up happening, so good for you, Jack. But anyway, Laura tries to talk to Arabella again here, and we can immediately tell that it is still very tense between them. So we're going to go and see what happens here. And we're going to learn a lot more about Laura Smith's past as well. So in the book it says, when the captain was finished ordering her men about, Captain Smith turned to her daughter and smiled, almost nicely. You've grown so, she murmured, reaching out a hand to touch Arabella's face. Let me alone, Arabella snapped, slapping her mother's hand away. She turned her face to the water, eyes red with angry tears. Captain Smith looked lost for a moment, for the first time unsure what to do. Then she gritted her teeth and took Jack aside. Can I have a word? You can have several, Jack said brightly. How about goodbye, or farewell, or here's your ship and a nice pile of gold as an unexpected bonus? Captain Laura Smith frowned. She took Jack by the arm and led him to the railing. Captain Sparrow, can you please just be straight with a long-lost mother? For just a moment. How has Arabella been? How long have you known her? Jack opened his mouth to say something smart-alecky, but he was stopped by the earnest look on Captain Smith's face. She was dying for news of her daughter, so Jack took a deep breath and told her. He started with how he first met Arabella, though he left out the bit about Fitzwilliam beating him in a duel. He told her about the city of bones they encountered and the treasure of the tracks they found of Left-Foot Lewis, though the treasure was a lot bigger in this version and the traps even more deadly. He mentioned the sirens and their hypnotic songs and the sea monsters. He alluded briefly to the undead Cortez and the timely intervention of Montezuma. He finished by recounting the crew's mission to recover Tuman's medallion and their battle against a room full of zombies. On the whole, except for a tendency to prattle on and be a big know-it-all, Jack concluded, a little more seriously, which isn't entirely fair since she really does seem to know it all, Arabella's the best first mate a captain could hope for, and a good friend. It nearly killed him to be that straight, but Laura's eyes were wide and bright in gratitude. Captain Sparrow, she said softly and not sarcastically, as she had earlier. May I have your permission to speak to your first mate alone? Well, that is Arabella's decision, Mum, Jack answered, but you have my permission if she doesn't mind. He went across the deck to his first mate, who was still staring out over the waves. She stood with her arms folded and her back defiantly toward her mom. I'm not talking to her, she said before Jack could say anything. Belle, he said sighing, I'm not one to agree with Fitzy, ever, but she is your mum. My dad never even tried to talk to me. Maybe you should hear what she has to say. Then you can do whatever you want, and I'll stand by you. All right, lass? Don't call me lass, she grumbled. He clapped her on the back. Come on, lads, he said to the rest of his crew. There's a very interesting fishy I want to show you off the prow. What fishy? Tim asked, curiously. John kicked his shin. Arabella would prefer some private time with her mother, Fitzwilliam explained, dragging the young boy with him across the deck. Arabella stomped up to her mom and looked her in the eye defiantly. Oh, I've missed you so much, Captain Smith said with a hopeful smile. I don't buy it, Mother, Arabella spat. If you missed your own daughter so very much, why did you find it so important to leave, and never give word of your being all right? Captain Smith sighed, sitting down on a barrel. She gestured for Arabella to join her, but her daughter stayed standing. It's a long story, love. When I married your father, running the faithful bride with him seemed like a nice, cozy little life, but he bought it without knowing the first thing about Tortuga. We thought it was a place for sailors and merchants to relax, not the pirate haven it turned out to be. They were always trashing the place, getting into bloody fights, smashing the furniture, sometimes the walls, often each other's heads. Despite herself, Arabella sympathized. It really did happen all the time, and as the barmaid, she was often in the thick of it. We were always in debt. Honest, rich patrons were scared away by the pirates, who never paid their tabs, by the way, and any little profits we made went into maintaining the place. You don't remember the leanest years, Arabella. We barely had enough to eat. Captain Laura's eyes glazed over as she remembered. I was so scared for you. I wanted to raise you right, with more money and food and things than my own parents gave me growing up. The captain paused. Then she continued. I had one nice dress of my own, from your father's and my wedding. I cut it up to make your baby clothes, Arabella. We couldn't even afford proper cloth that would be soft and fit for a baby. Arabella turned her head to scratch her nose so she didn't have to look at her mother's face. I loved you, Arabella, she said softly. You were my only joy in that hard life, and we were failing our wee little babe. There weren't a lot of options for an honest family in Tortuga. Well, not a lot of honest options. She gave a wry grin and shook her head. Then she sighed and continued. This is how it happened, love. I had this habit of listening in on the pirates' conversations. When you're a barmaid, no one notices you, you know. I know, Arabella answered before she could stop herself. It was true. It's what got Arabella started on this adventure as part of Jack's crew. Her mother smiled at the one admission. Well, I overheard this one smuggler telling another how he was having a spot of trouble getting his rum from Rum Runner's Isle to Port Royal. He was always caught, and his barrels seized, no matter what he did, and a fierce battle always ensued. He lost more employees that way, if you take my drift. He even tried dressing as a lady once, all in skirts and finery, but he never could fool the authorities. Arabella's mother sat up straight with a smile, remembering the scene. So I say to him, "Look here, mate, what you need is a real lady to smuggle in your rum for you." He hired me on the spot. Every new moon, when the sea and night were dark, I boarded his ship, and if we were stopped by the authority, I would act all highfalutin about them stopping a lady about her business. Although the image definitely appealed to Arabella, the illegality of it did not. My mother, the rum runner, she said, shaking her head. I made enough to support us, young lady, Captain Laura said sharply, at a time when the faithful bride was losing money faster than a Marine on payday. And your father, well, he just wasn't working anymore, at anything. He just sat in the back and drank. With drink comes anger, and with anger, violence. The captain shook her head sadly and angrily. I hoarded my money for months to save for a time when I could take you and leave the bride and your father forever. Take you someplace nice, Hispaniola maybe, or Boston, or Newfoundland. Then a night came, just weeks before I had enough, when I was double-crossed by my partner, Left Foot Lewis. Arabella's eyes widened in surprise. Then she frowned in suspicion. Partner? I thought you said you were play-acted a part to get them past the Navy and Merchant Marine. When did you become a partner in this little scheme? Well, her mother said with a faint blush, it didn't stay so little, you know. After a time, the smuggling became a bit more profitable. I took a larger share, and the bride just became my cover. We branched out into other areas of activity. But let me get back to the telling, she said impatiently, changing the subject. Lewis took all my money. So one night, when he was in his cups with the faithful bride, I took out my pistol and shoved it under his gut. What happened? Arabella asked breathlessly. Arabella remembered that night, but from a little girl's point of view. All she saw was her mom being dragged out of the tavern, not the part where her mom attacked a notorious pirate. Oh, he was much faster back then, when he was younger, Smith said disgustedly. Grabbed me by the hair with one hand and grabbed the pistol with the other. He dragged me outside while your father slept upstairs, passed out from the drink. I tried to run after you, Arabella said, remembering. She couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 at the time. It was a blurry memory, filled with noise and crying and fear. And 2 of Lewis's men held you back, her mother continued. And I never saw you again, Arabella finished sadly. You must have been so scared seeing me taken from you like that, Captain Smith said. But in the long run, my being taken from the tavern was not such a bad thing. Once outside, Lewis stumbled in the rain. I drew my sword. You had a pistol and a sword? Arabella asked incredulously. I was smuggling, Captain Laura said deliberately, as if she was spelling it out for her daughter to understand. So I draw mine, he draws his, and before you know it, we're clashing and clanging in the rainy night. Of course, he's drunk, and I'm mad, so it's hardly surprising when I get the better of him. I grabbed my money back and decided not to take any more chances with useless husbands and double-crossing pirates. I took myself off to a fine boat I had stashed away for just such an emergency, the Fleur de la Morte. Aye, she's a very special ship, with a very special quality. She patted the railing lovingly. So you just left, Arabella said flatly. You took off in your fancy pirate vessel for the high seas. I always intended to return for you, dear, her mother said. I just didn't want you to know I was a pirate. When I came back, it was going to be as an honest woman with money and a house and a place you could move to, with dresses and toys like you never had, a dowry if you wanted to marry. I thought you'd rather believe I was dead than one of the filthy dock rats who drink at the bride. Arabella looked at her mother for a long moment, thinking. Her mother looked hopefully back. But you are a pirate, Arabella finally said. As are you, Captain Smith said with a smile. You have pirate in your blood. Arabella's face darkened. I am nothing like you, she spat. I wish you were dead, mother. Captain Smith frowned at her daughter, setting her jaw. Then she slapped Arabella across the face and stormed off. So, yeah, as you can tell, still very tense between Laura and Arabella. But we do find out the rest of the story we didn't know about Laura there in that passage. So she and Left Foot Lewis were partners and smuggled together, which is interesting to note. So this adds a lot more history to the two of them than we previously thought. And also, it was a very brief at the beginning of that passage, but we did get a mention of Captain Teague when Jack said to Arabella that his dad never even tried to talk to him, if you caught that, which was really cool. A little mention that will tide us over a few more books until we get to that very exciting Book 10, The Sins of the Father. But anyway, while Laura and Arabella are talking, Jack decides to go below decks and see what's up with Silverback and Leftfoot Lewis. He asks his crew to come with him, but they all tell Jack no, especially John and Tuman. Tim and Fitzy also turn Jack down, so Jack has no choice but to go below decks himself. So he heads below and he tries to look inconspicuous, but he notices two people approaching. So he jumps into a barrel and hides while the two pirates come closer, and Jack notices that these two pirates are Silverback and Leftfoot Lewis. And if you remember earlier when the two of them were together, it didn't seem like they liked each other at all. But Jack notices now they're getting along just fine. And Jack also notices something hanging around Silverback's neck, and he realizes it looks a lot like the bronze gem from the amulet, but this one happens to be silver. But anyway, Jack continues to listen in to their conversation here, so let's see what happens with Silverback and Leftfoot Lewis. So it begins, "Laura's still completely fooled, isn't she?" "We pulled the wool over her eyes," Leftfoot said with a rotten, toothy grin. "For now, yes," Silverback said, nodding. "She still thinks we hate each other, that we're at each other's throats. We must be careful to maintain this ruse. I think the time is drawing nigh to execute our plan." "Aye," Lewis said with a growl. "Once we get our mates to take over the ship, I can return to the cutlass, go back to being a proper captain again. And I can take over the floor," Silverback said with a gleam in his eye. "I don't think it will take much to incite the crew. Captain Laura runs a little too tight a ship for pirates, anyway." They were planning a mutiny, Jack realized with horror. The foulest crime on the high seas. Instant hanging offense, no matter what your alignment, Navy, merchant, or pirate. These two were the worst of the worst. "It's a little more complicated now with her daughter and her weird little friends," Silverback pointed out. "Weird, fine, but little?" Jack took offense at that. "Now she's got allies," Lewis agreed. "It could be a problem." Silverback laughed. "I said complicated, not a problem. They're just children, Lewis." "Oh, aye, but—" Lewis looked around, then leaned forward to whisper into the other pirate's ear. It was obvious that Silverback didn't appreciate the gesture, or Lewis's breath. "Don't be fooled. I know they look like wee barns, but they're a force to contend with. Trust me on this one, especially the cat." "Oh, don't be ridiculous, Lewis," Silverback said, waving his hand in dismissal. "A cat indeed. We'll get rid of them and then Mr. Reese. It will be quick. We'll have no more obstacles to our mission." Now it was Jack's turn to sneer. It wouldn't be easy or quick, nor would they succeed. Lewis was right. The crew of the Barnacle really was a force to be reckoned with, and once Arabella and Captain Smith made up, they would join forces and overcome this mutiny. Assuming Arabella and her mom actually made up. Now what were those two pirates doing, Jack wondered. While Jack was being all smug, they had stopped talking. Then he saw Lewis come back into view and head straight for the barrel. Jack gulped and held his breath. It was like Lewis somehow knew exactly where Jack was. He leaned over and reached in. Jack panicked, brushing himself up against the slimy wood. He frantically grabbed one of the slippery, rubbery things that he was sitting on and shoved it into Lewis's hand. Lewis pulled his hand out. Apparently, it was what he was reaching for after all. He had no idea Jack was in there, too. "So the mutiny will take place tonight at dusk," Silverback said. "Aye," Lewis nodded and offered him the slimy thing. It was a fish, head and all, mostly raw and only half pickled. Silverback shook his head. Lewis shrugged and shoved it into his mouth head first. With a contented growl, he ripped off a chunk. Then he chewed with satisfied smacking noises. Jack shuddered. He couldn't imagine eating a fish like that. At least, not without some paprika sprinkled on top. So yeah, also I just want to really quickly note how it mentions paprika at the end there, and how Jack would want that sprinkled on top of some fish, which is a cool little connection because you remember from Dead Man's Chest, when Jack is trying to escape from the Pelagostos, he finds the can of paprika in one of the huts, and then when he's caught, he sprinkles it into his armpits and says, "A little seasoning, eh?" So I'm assuming this paprika mention here is kind of alluding to that, so that's a cool little reference. But anyway, what we come to find out here is that Silverback and Leftfoot Lewis are planning a mutiny aboard the Fleur de la Mort, and said mutiny will happen at dusk. So Jack now has to warn everyone this mutiny is about to occur. We go back to Arabella and her mom, who are still trying to get along. So let's go take a look at what happens next with the two of them. So in the book, it says, Captain Laura Smith was looking out over the sea, still fuming. Then she sighed deeply and went back to her daughter. Arabella began, unsure of what was going to come out. Forgiveness? Anger? I thought you were dead. Couldn't you have gotten me some word or somehow? Whatever her mother was about to say next was lost forever when First Mate Reese approached and interrupted them. Beg pardon, Captain, but I've just finished looking at the charts. If these winds keep up, we should be in Port Royal in a little less than a day. Excellent, Mr. Reese. And the East India Trading Company ship we're scheduled to intercept? Mr. Reese grinned. Right on target, Captain, according to our sources. All of Arabella's confusion about her mother vanished. Oh, right, I forgot. Not only did you run away from your only daughter for life on the high seas, but you're also a pirate, she said disgustedly. You should have all the facts before going about accusing people, her mother said sharply. The captain of the ship we're going to seize already knows about our little heist. In fact, he helped plan it. We're going to split the profits. And this is better how? Arabella snarled. People could still get killed in the fight, and it's still stealing. Her mother rolled her eyes and patted her daughter on the head, as if to say, you're too young to understand. Arabella stomped away toward a concerned-looking Fitzwilliam. Meanwhile, Jack had waited until the coast was clear to come out of his stinky barrel. He popped his head out of the hatch to see if anyone was looking, then sprang up onto the deck. He practically fell over himself, running toward Arabella. There, do not be too upset, Fitzwilliam was saying to her, arms open for a comforting hug. Your mother just... Yes, no time for that now, Jack said, grabbing Arabella and steering her away. Fitzwilliam's face fell. Jack put an arm around Arabella's shoulder, pretending to comfort her. You stink, Jack, Arabella said, holding her nose and pushing Jack away. Curious, he took a whiff of himself. Unfortunately, he had to agree. He was sopping in half-pickled fish juices. Sorry about that, but look, we've got a problem, Bellamy lass. Get away from me, Jack, she said, angry to the point of tears. I'm in no mood for your games. Jack sighed and tightened his grip so she couldn't get away. No, a real problem, my faithful first mate. I did a little legwork on the couple of the year there, Silverback and Leftfoot Lewis. Turns out they're actually in cahoots, demonical, piratical cahoots. They planned a mutiny for tonight, and it sounds like they have most of the ship on their side. Arabella's eyes widened at the word mutiny. Usually, when pirates were sick of a captain, they just demoted him, or her, and picked a new one. It was one of the only civilized, bloodless things they did. Then she shrugged. So what? Good riddance. My mother's a pirate. She chose a life of villainy and bloodshed. Serves her right. Jack closed his eyes in exasperation. So rarely did any of his crew ever stop to see the big picture. All right, Belle. First thing, you have got to let this thing with your mother go. Drop it, just for a moment. Second thing, it's not your dear mum I'm worried about, lass. Lewis and Silverback have said they are going to come after us, you and me and everyone on the Barnacle first, because they have some wacky notion that because you're Captain Laura's daughter, you would help her out. Arabella frowned, trying to figure out what Jack was driving at. We have to get off this ship, Jack spelled it out for her impatiently. Savvy? Arabella looked a little uncertain. But how will we do that? Jack squinted at the horizon. The sun lay right above it, beginning to mellow in the late afternoon. We only have a little while before dusk. Everyone is going to be ramping up for this mutiny thing. Tell the others, quietly, to start heading toward the Barnacle. Once the commotion starts, no one will notice us slipping over the side. It should be easy in the confusion, as long as we don't run afoul of Silverback and Lewis. I'll see if I can loosen the ropes now, while no one's looking. Arabella nodded mutely. She went over to Fitzwilliam first, who was pretending to be interested in a particular knot in the rigging. He had been trying to listen in on her and Jack, but the wind wasn't right. Be prepared to leave, she said, also pretending to look at the knot. There's going to be a mutiny. Start heading, casual-like, to the Barnacle. If Captain Smith spots you, just pretend you're doing something else. No one else will care. Mutiny, Fitzwilliam mouthed. Then he sneered. I would expect no better of these pirates, he hissed. Arabella just ignored him, moving on toward John and Tuman. She had no desire to get into a discussion with the aristocrat about how this was unusual behavior for pirates. How their leadership was actually quite democratic. The captain was elected and the profits were shared equally. A much better system than any of the private merchant ships, really, if you didn't mind the looting and pillaging and the powers that would never let a woman be in charge of a proper ship. Arabella shook her head. Was she feeling sympathy for her mother's chosen profession? She wouldn't allow it. She bit her lip and sneaked a glance at her mother. Captain Laura was giving some order in high spirits, the wind blowing her hair back, a fierce smile on her face. The pirate who she spoke to nodded and hurried away. At least he looked like he was fully devoted to her. All Arabella really wanted with the sword of Cortez, and the treasure, and these adventures, was freedom. Freedom to be able to be her own woman. And here was her mom, already doing just that. And now her treacherous crew was going to take it all away, and probably kill her. "Mamselle," John said as Arabella came up to him, "you seem a little out of sorts." He and Tumen were sitting on barrels, looking like they were enjoying themselves despite their situation. A pile of several banana peels lay on the deck, and Tumen's mouth was still full. "The crew is planning a mutiny," she said, still looking at her mother. "While everyone is distracted with that, we're to head to the barnacle and escape." "But your mother," John said with concern. "Will she be all right?" I don't know," Arabella said. As much as she had wished her ill, or thought she did, it really was different from seeing her forced to walk the plank by her own crew. Jack watched Arabella as he sneaked over to where his ship was tied to the floor. She was obviously worried about her mom, no matter how much she pretended she wasn't. He sighed. They would probably wind up having to figure out some way to rescue her, too. Lewis and Silverback climbed out of the hatch, fighting as usual. "You're a yellow-bellied, scrawny whelp of a man," Lewis bellowed with enthusiasm. Mr. Reese saw the two and frowned. He marched up to them, his bright blue eyes blazing. "May I remind you, the captain has ordered that you remain below deck for a time?" Silverback turned to the first mate and grinned, a nasty, leering grin. His tooth flashed blue, and the first mate of the Fleur de la Mort disappeared. Jack was idly wondering where he had disappeared to, when Silverback turned to him, like he knew he was watching all along. His tooth and leg were still flashing blue. "And you're next," Silverback said threateningly, smiling at Jack. So you all know I love small references. So when I first read that, I got super excited hearing, Port Royal and the East India Trading Company being mentioned. So that was super cool. But anyway, it seems like the mutiny is beginning as Silverback has just made Mr. Reese disappear. His crystal leg and tooth glowed blue, so obviously we can tell the blue color is associated with the teleportation aspect of his magic. And it seems like Silverback is going after Jack next. But Jack stops him when he pulls out the amulet, the Sun and Stars Amulet. And since Silverback has the silver bullet around his neck, this makes him lunge after Jack, trying to take the amulet from him. So as Jack keeps on enticing Silverback, the man finally loses his temper and yells at Jack to give him back the medallion. He says, "Give me my medallion!" And his leg and tooth glow red. But Arabella notices what's going on, then jumps between Jack and Silverback and calls out to her mother, telling her that Silverback and Lewis plan to start a mutiny. And then everyone on board then pulls out their swords once they hear the word mutiny said aloud. Of course, now this has derailed Jack's plan of sneaking away and not getting involved in the mutiny, but he decides to stand his ground and fight along with the crew. So Leftfoot Lewis charges toward Laura Smith, and once they both clash, everyone on board begins to fight. So Jack then urges Arabella away, and he tells her that he will handle Silverback on his own. So let's dive right back into the book and see how this fight unfolds. So in the book it says, Silverback grinned at Jack and his tooth started to flash red. Then Jack struck Silverback's crystal leg full on with the blade of his sword. It rang like a bell. The vibrations traveled up his leg and through Silverback's body. Silverback shook himself free and prepared to concentrate again, his tooth beginning to glow. And Jack struck his leg again, higher up to see if it made a different sound. It did. Jack cleared his throat and hummed, trying to match the key. Blow high and blow low, and so sailed we, he sang. "Cut that out," Silverback demanded. "Then fight like a man, not a sorcerer," Jack growled, attacking him in earnest. "Fine, I can beat you any way you want, you whelp," Silverback promised, drawing his sword. The two dove at each other madly. Farther up the deck, the crew of the Barnacle joined the fray. "I do not understand. Who are we fighting?" Fitzwilliam said, confused. "The pirates, or just the mutinous pirates? Or the people in charge of the mutinous pirates?" "Anyone who raises a sword," Tim Hawk suggested helpfully, pulling out his own little knife and charging. "It looks like there are about 3 of them for every one of us," Tumen observed, standing back to back with John as they both fended off vicious pirates. "Those are the odds just the way I like them," John said with a wolfish grin. "As Madam Captain said, on guard!" A pair of pirates, one with a sword and one with something that looked suspiciously like a scythe, advanced on John. With a grin, the boy leapt and spun, holding his rapier out as far as it would go. The tip sliced through the pirates' shirts and grazed their stomachs. They sucked in their guts to avoid being cut, and John dropped to the deck and rolled. He knocked into the legs of the one closest to him. The pirate toppled, falling onto his friend. Tuman had his long obsidian knife out. Its shiny black blade flashed wickedly in the sunlight. A frustrated pirate with a black eye patch and matching bandana kept lunging at him with a rusty old cutlass. But Tuman was too fast for him, and too short. He was able to duck and weave, avoiding every strike. "Stay still, mouse," the pirate roared. "All right," Tuman agreed. He froze, then quickly brought his dagger up at an unexpected angle. With barely a whisper of a ripped cloth, it cut his opponent's hand. Howling and grabbing his bleeding arm, the pirate fell to the deck. His cutlass flew through the air. Tuman leapt nimbly on top of him, catching the sword as it fell. "A mouse that roars," Tuman said. Fitzwilliam was using his famous fancy footwork to fight two pirates at once. He advanced, pushing them backward to the prow. His shiny sword glittered and clanged. He parried their every blow with ease. "Yes! Retreat, you blackguards!" Fitzwilliam called out enthusiastically. It wasn't quite the glorious duel against villains that the nobleman's son had always imagined. Rather than rallying against him for a good fight, the cowards kept backing up away from his blows. And when they finally ran out of deck, they went over the ship's rail, where they tumbled into the sea. Meanwhile, Tim Hawk ducked around a barrel, baiting a giant pirate into chasing him. He popped his head out of the left side and made a face. The pirate slashed at him, but Tim quickly withdrew and then popped his head out the right side. The pirate missed again. Tim kept moving and the pirate kept slashing, always missing the boy by inches. Finally, the pirate brought his sword down too hard. It stuck in the barrel's wood. Tim ducked in between the pirate's legs while he was busy trying to free his blade, and pulled the pirate's pants down around his ankles. The giant pirate howled with frustration, unable to get his sword out and pull his pants up at the same time. Arabella was distracted fighting two pirates of her own. Being a barmaid in a dangerous tavern had taught her quite a few tactics over the years, but she couldn't help nervously keeping an eye on her mother and Left-Foot Lewis as they sparred a few feet away from her. It was like reliving that horrible night in The Faithful Bride so many years before. Any moment she expected Lewis to win, grabbing her mother and hauling her away. Again. "I've been waiting months for this," Left-Foot said with an evil grin. He wasn't as quick as he had been years ago, but he was definitely stronger. It took all of Captain Lara's energy and skill to avoid his sword each time he tried to swing it down on her. "I should have killed you when I had the chance," she growled. "A mutinous pirate. You're a real scoundrel, Left-Foot." "I like to think so, Madam Captain," Lewis replied. Fitzwilliam slid past them back down the deck, fighting off 3 pirates this time, and the pirates were winning. There was a red gash across Fitzwilliam's forehead, and his blue jacket and red vest were torn. "How you doing there, mate?" Jack called out, parrying a blow from Silverback, who was a much better swordsman than Jack had guessed. "Because you asked, I could use another sword at my side," Fitzwilliam admitted. "Here, begging your pardon for a moment," Jack said politely to Silverback. Then he spun and with the back of his pommel knocked another pirate in the head. As he toppled to the ground, his cutlass flew up. Jack caught it and tossed it to Fitzwilliam. "How's that?" Jack asked, turning back to continue his fight with Silverback. "Not exactly what I meant, but it will do," Fitzwilliam said with a grin. He caught the sword in his left hand and renewed the attack on his assailants with both blades, and he was equally good with each. "The gig's up," Jack told Silverback in between blows. "Hardly," Silverback replied, but he looked nervous. The tide of fighting on the boat was definitely turning. Fitzwilliam, John, Tuman, and Tim Hawk made a team effort to herd the almost defeated pirates to the center of the deck, conveniently near the hatch. The casualties were piling up, and the mutineers were quickly becoming dismayed. Lara and Left-Foot were still dueling. The captain's sword was broken in half, but she still managed to parry with the pommel. Lewis was advancing on her with a crazed look in his eyes. Silverback turned his attention to them. "Left-Foot, forget the captain. We should make our escape." "Not with this, you don't," Jack yelled. He seized the moment. Silverback was distracted. With a delicate move, Jack lashed out the very tip of his sword to the pirate's neck. He hooked the cord with a silver bullet on the end and yanked it over Silverback's head. The necklace flew through the air, landing with a comforting thwack in Jack's hand. Silverback clutched his throat with his hands, dropping his sword. "The gem!" he screamed. Jack leveled his cutlass at Silverback's chest, pushing him up against the mast. "The gem's not all you have to worry about there, mate." Left-Foot Lewis barely noticed his fellow mutineer's defeat. So intent was he on overthrowing Arabella's mother. With a growl, he backed her up against the other side of the mast. Captain Smith gasped. Lewis raised his sword above his hands and brought it down with both his meaty hands. And Captain Smith drew a knife out. She crossed it over what was left of her own broken sword and caught Lewis's blades between them. With a blood-curdling cry, she brought the blades apart, spinning the sword out of Lewis's hands and over the side of the boat. Then she kicked him in the ribs. When he went down, she raised her knife, ready to cut his throat. "No!" Arabella and Silverback cried out at the same time. And then, Left-Foot and Silverback disappeared. So, at the end there, Jack was able to get the silver bullet back from Silverback, right before him and Leftfoot Lewis disappeared. So everyone on the Fleur de la Mort tries to see what happened to them, but Tumen then notices a rowboat sailing away with Silverback and Leftfoot Lewis inside, and Silverback's leg is still glowing red. So Laura gives the order to follow them, but she realizes most of her crew had mutinied against her, and were now being thrown into the brig by the Barnacle's crew. But even still, Laura wants to go after them and get revenge, but Jack tells her to let it go for now. And after this, we also find out that Mr. Reese is still alive and well, despite being magicked away by Silverback earlier. So he tells them that he was teleported a few feet underwater by Silverback, but he was able to swim up and grab the side of the ship and survive. Jack then notices a giant Navy ship sailing toward them from the opposite direction that Silverback and Lewis were sailing to. But if you remember from earlier, Laura Smith said that the Fleur de la Mort has a special quality, and we are about to find out what that quality is. So while Captain Smith orders everyone to unfurl the sails, Jack is getting nervous since the Fleur de la Mort has no chance of escaping this giant Navy ship. But once the sails are unfurled, the ship begins to move slowly, and the British Navy ship advancing toward them becomes confused. And this is because the Fleur de la Mort's special quality is that it becomes invisible to others when its sails are unfurled. So this Navy ship, which is named the Pride of London, by the way, just sails away because the Fleur de la Mort had vanished before them. So obviously this is a very awesome thing to have on your ship. I mean, awesome, seriously. Laura tells the crew the sails were woven in the Samoan Islands by mystic fishermen. And these sails are described in the book to be a blue that blended perfectly with the Caribbean sky, and they had a whispery spiderweb soft sheen that glowed off them. So now the Navy issue has been settled, Tumen asks what their heading is, and Laura tells them they'll be heading to New Orleans to track down Lewis and Silverback. But Arabella tells her mother that she and her friends have to go to the Yucatan to bring the amulet back to Tumen's people. And as you can probably tell, this has the makings of another mother-daughter argument. So let's go see what happens in the book. So Arabella begins and says, "You're not my captain, Jack is. And I noticed you didn't answer my question," Arabella said, sticking out her lower lip. "The part about loyalty and promises?" "You insolent girl, I am extremely loyal to my friends and allies," Captain Smith said, hands clenching and unclenching as if she wanted to smack someone again. "But not daughters, it seems," Arabella said scornfully. Jack said, getting a little uncomfortable. He traded a look with Fitzwilliam, who was also shifting nervously. "I told you my story. I guess I shouldn't expect little girls to understand the difficult choices adults have to make," Captain Smith said with a sniff. "Difficult choices? You abandoned your child because you didn't like the life you had." Arabella's voice began to get shrieky. Jack said again. Mr. Reese was carefully studying the deck. Tumen and John were fidgeting. "Some of us didn't have a Jack to save us from it all," Captain Laura shouted back, leaning forward into her daughter's face. "I am not a damsel in distress. He didn't save me," Arabella screamed. That was it. Jack raised his eyebrows and moved his head in the direction of the hatch. Relieved beyond words, Tim, Fitzwilliam, John, and Tumen eagerly rushed below decks to escape the mother-daughter feud. Mr. Reese looked like he sorely wished he could go with them, but he was a loyal first mate. Jack came quickly after. Neither Arabella nor Captain Laura Smith noticed. The 5 boys gathered in the captain's office, which had a nice large table they could all sit around. But even though there were several layers of wood and tar and planking beneath them and the deck, the 2 women could still be heard screaming at each other up above. "Useless bar brat! Sea cow!" Jack winced. "Fitzy, light us a lantern, would you?" The aristocrat did as he was told. He set it in the middle of the thick wooden table. Jack carefully laid the medallion out in front of him. It glinted, reflecting the lantern's flames. Then he took out the silver gem he had swiped from Silverback and laid it next to the medallion. "Where on earth did you get that?" Fitzwilliam asked in surprise. None of them had seen the fight with Silverback or seen Jack take the gem from him. "A pirate gave it to me," Jack said whimsically. "Looks like a good fit, doesn't it?" He moved it so it was near an open setting of the medallion, next to the bronze one. "That gem! It's mine!" Tim cried out. Everyone stared at him. The crew was taken aback. They didn't know him very well. They had only just picked him up in New Orleans, and he had previously been working with the villainous Madame Minuit. Had they trusted him too quickly? Tim shrank back a bit. I mean, my family's, he explained more calmly, but he never took his eyes off the silver gem. This whole medallion thing is getting stranger and stranger, Jack said slowly. Maybe you better explain yourself, lad. Start from the beginning. Tim cleared his throat, a little reluctant to tell his sad story. It's been in my family for generations. My great-great-grandfather, Jebediah Hawk, acquired it from one of his expeditions to the New World. The Hawks still lived in England back then. My dad never thought it was anything special, just a souvenir from a trip. A charm. It's just silver after all. But it was one of the few things our family had, you know? His face darkened, remembering. Silverback came looking for it 2 years ago. It was a horrible night. His leg and terrible grin all glowing red like fire. Everything in the house flying around. I'd never seen anything like it. Before that time, nothing out of the ordinary had happened to me, or anyone I knew for that matter. Wizards and magic and supernatural things were things you read about, not things you lived. I didn't know there were really wizards, or pirates, or pirate wizards. I thought they were just stories my dad told me. He took a deep breath. Silverback destroyed everything looking for the gem. I remember him screaming like a madman. Where is it? Where's the silver bullet? Then his leg and face glowed this horrible yellow, and he turned, looking right at me. My father grabbed me and pushed me out of the back door and made me run away. When I looked back, all I saw were flames, and Silverback still grinning. I don't know what happened to my mom and dad. His eyes were very bright with memory in the lantern light. There now, lad, Fitzwilliam said with a little awkwardly. Go on, Jack prodded the boy. I stowed away on the first fishing vessel I could find that was headed to Barbados, Tim continued after collecting himself. My uncle lives there. I thought I could live with him, and together we could find my family. Maybe they were still alive. Maybe they were already on their way to see him. But then we made a port of call at the mouth of the Pantano River. I left the boat for a little while, just enough time to find or steal some food. A stranger approached me. He was dressed all in rags and looked crazy, with these dead snakes hanging around his neck. Jack's eyebrows raised. He immediately recognized the description of the old man in rags. It was the same disguise Madame Minuit used when the crew confronted her in New Orleans. Madame Minuit, Jack said. The boy nodded grimly. She grabbed my arm and told my own story back to me. The gem, my home going up in flames, the fact I was looking for my parents, and she told me she would help me if I did as she said. What did you do? Fitzwilliam asked. The boy gave him a look. A crazy man with dead snakes hanging around his neck who can read your mind and ask you to do some things for him? What did you think I did? I told him I would seriously think about it, and I seriously thought about turning around and running the other way. I'm with you there, lad, Jack said, getting to the point. I waited too long to say anything, and then one of her snakes came alive and bit me. As you know, a snake bite from Madame will possess you. So I was hypnotized. From that moment on, I was under her spell, Tim finished, shrugging helplessly. She used me to help her look first for the bronze gem, and then the amulet herself. What a fascinating story, Jack said, pretending to stifle a yawn. Let me give you a hint, though, for future storytelling endeavors. Show, don't tell. Stick to the facts. Your silver gem became Silverback Silver Gem, and you got shanghaied by Madame Minuit. That just about sums it up? Excuse me for being thorough. As I'm quickly learning, that's not really par for the course around here, Tim said sarcastically. Jack held his hand up and suddenly looked serious. The one thing your story does prove is that this gem is connected to this medallion. The medallion is connected with Silverback, and Silverback is connected to Madame Minuit. How else would she have known to come for you? Jack said. Now, he continued, there's only one thing left to do. He took the silver gem and fitted it into the medallion. So in that passage, we learn some backstory about Tim Hawk and his family and how he is also connected to this whole amulet story and the silver bullet gem. So Jack then takes the silver gem and he puts it into the second slot of the amulet, and to his surprise, nothing happens. He then tries tapping the table to see if it will turn to silver like things did with the bronze gem, but still nothing happens. But unfortunately, they're interrupted by Laura Smith, who walks in, still furious from the fight with Arabella, and she tells them to get off her ship. So the crew of the Barnacle begin to untie the lines holding the Barnacle to the floor of the Mort, and Jack takes a moment to talk to Laura. So back in the book here, it begins, with a sudden burst of maturity, Jack decided he would be big about things. For good or ill, Laura was Arabella's mother, even if she was a blasted pirate. Without her, the Barnacle would not have a first mate. Feeling very charitable, Jack approached Captain Laura Smith and gave her a fancy bow. Then he put out his hand. Looking at him suspiciously, the captain took it. "Very nice to make your acquaintance, Captain Smith," he said gallantly. "Perhaps we shall see each other again some day about the Caribbean." Though he sorely hoped not. It was obvious that Arabella's mother was thinking the same thing. "Likewise," she lied. "So," Jack said casually, looking from Laura to Mr. Reese, "what did you finally decide to do about your mutinous crew?" "One by one they will be brought before the captain and asked to swear allegiance," Mr. Reese said. "Those who don't will be immediately thrown overboard." Jack laughed, then looked at Laura to see if this was all a joke. He gulped when he saw the severe look in her eyes. She was dead serious. In this respect, at least, the mother and daughter were different. For all her bluster, Arabella would never have been so cold about hurting people, even pirates. John, Tuman, Fitzwilliam, and Tim, and Constance, took their leave and boarded the Barnacle. Jack saluted and followed suit, leaving Arabella alone to say her final goodbyes to her mother. "So you have chosen to leave," her mother said grimly. "We were just reunited, and now you're going off with that insane captain and crew of yours." Arabella shrugged. "I need some time to think about things. About you. I wish things could be different, but seeing you suddenly alive, knowing you were alive all these years, as a pirate, I'm angry and confused and hurt. And confused. I don't know what to tell you." "Then let me make things a little easier for you," her mother offered, her smile softening. Then she nodded to Mr. Reese. The first mate lunged forward and unsheathed his cutlass. With a sharp crack, he brought it down on the last line that tied the Barnacle to the floor. "No!" Jack cried out. The Barnacle began to drift away. Within moments, the floor, with its magical sails unfurled, began to grow hazy and dim. In less than a minute, it was completely invisible. Arabella was gone. So, the Fleur de la Mort, along with Laura Smith and Arabella, are now gone, thanks to the sails that cloak the ship, making it pretty impossible to follow the ship. So the crew of the Barnacle just stands there in shock, like unsure of what to do, and John tells them they should go back to Tuman's village and return the amulet, and Fitzy agrees with him. But Jack is set on sailing to New Orleans to get Arabella back. He also adds that everything happens to be converging there. Silverback and Leftfoot Lewis are heading there, and Madame Minuit is still alive and possibly still in control, and they know that Laura is hunting down Silverback and Lewis, so they know that Arabella will be in New Orleans too. So we're going to go back into the book one more time here and see what happens here. Jack then turned to Tuman. "I have no intention of breaking any promise. We will return to your village. But if we don't go after Arabella now, we may never get her back. Unless you can think of some other way of tracking an invisible ship around the Caribbean. Savvy?" "Is that really your decision, Jack?" Fitzwilliam demanded. "Arabella is finally reunited with her mother, who she has missed all these years. Understandably, she is quite confused right now, but she may choose to stay with her once she gets her feelings sorted out." "Which is fine," Jack said, throwing his arms up in the air, "if we knew Arabella happily chose to go along with her mum. But that stubborn woman pirate stole her. You all heard Arabella. She wanted to stay with us. And the way they were fighting didn't make it sound as though they were getting on to makeup anytime soon. If we rescue Arabella and she chooses of her own free will to stay with that wretched captain, then she can go." John, Tuman, and Tim nodded thoughtfully at this. At some point, each had had his whole life determined by someone else's choice. All three of them felt very strongly about Arabella's freedom to choose her own life. "Her own free will?" Fitzwilliam asked. "She is just a teenager. Now that her mother is back in the picture, should it not be Laura Smith who has the final say on where her daughter lives and with whom?" "Oh, I'm sorry, I completely forgot," Jack said with great sarcasm. "You're absolutely right, Fitzwilliam P. Dalton III. Although, come to think of it, I'm pretty certain Fitzwilliam P. Dalton II probably wouldn't want his precious hair sailing around the Caribbean with the fugitive Jack Sparrow aboard the mighty Barnacle." "Fugitive?" Tuman whispered to John. "I thought he told Arabella he was a stowaway." John shrugged. It was a mystery, but somehow not surprising coming from their mysterious and dramatic captain. "You know I'm right," Jack prodded the nobleman's son. Fitzwilliam turned beet red. "I think you're supposed to say touché," Jack said generously with a little bow. "So perhaps you have a point," the aristocrat admitted through gritted teeth. Jack grinned. He loved winning. John frowned, noticing something. The way the bright sunlight reflected off of Jack's teeth. He leaned forward to get a better look. Jack was surprised by this. "What's the matter there? Spinach in my teeth, mate?" "Écoutez, look at this," John said, tapping Tuman on the shoulder. Tuman stuck his face into Jack's as well. He frowned. Intrigued, Tim and Fitzwilliam joined in, coming way too close for Jack's comfort. But when Constance jumped up onto John's shoulder and also peered down, breathing her terrible catty breath in his face, he decided he'd had enough. Mind stepping out of my personal space? Thank you, Jack said, nervous, trying to back away. But John grabbed him on one side and 2 men on the other. Here, this will help, Fitzwilliam said, reaching into his jacket. He pulled out a little pocket mirror, a slightly concave one. He carefully held it over his head, turning it to focus the rays of sun onto Jack's teeth. John and 2 men held their captain tightly, not letting him look away. This is mutiny, Jack said, but with his mouth forced open, it sounded like, We, John said, ignoring him. It's silver. What? Jack demanded, shaking himself loose. 2 men and John let him go. Fitzwilliam handed him the mirror. Your tooth, the bronze one, Fitzwilliam explained. It is now silver. Jack took the mirror and pointed it at his mouth, pulling his lips back. They were right. The dull goldish tooth was now a mercury shiny silver one. He ran his tongue over it. Yep, tasted like silver too. Well, I'll be, Jack said thoughtfully. I wonder if that means... Whatever he thought, it was interrupted by another set of blank, astonished faces from his crew. They weren't looking at him, though. They were looking over his shoulder. What is it now? Jack demanded, irritated. What could possibly be more fascinating than my silvery new tooth? 2 men just pointed wordlessly behind him. Jack slowly turned around, by now well used to the horrible and unexpected things the sea could produce. Monsters, sirens, half-pickled fish, ships made out of bronze, and actually, it was a ship made out of metal. The same one Jack and the crew had sailed past a week before, in fact. The same ship that started this whole adventure, the one that had been turned to bronze, and was surrounded by bronze water. More of the metal water had rusted and broken off from around it, but that wasn't the biggest difference. It was now entirely silver. Bright, shiny silver, so bright in fact that it was impossible to look at directly. The planks and portholes were like mirrors, the ropes like massive silver chains. It looked like something out of legend, something gods would ride in. As I was saying, Jack continued, trying not to be awed by the sight, methinks the medallion works after all. Just not in the way we expected, Fitzwilliam finished. Everything that was turned into bronze is now turned into silver, Tim said, thinking out loud and nodding. If Belle were here, she would probably give us some long-winded scientific or historical or magical explanation, Jack said. Fitzwilliam didn't have a snooty answer this time. He looked at the deck. She had only been gone a little while, and already they were missing her. Nouvelle Orleans, John suddenly realized. The city must have all turned to silver as well. That settles it then, Jack said gleefully, grabbing the wheel and giving it a spin. We're Silver City bound, crew, to rescue our first mate. And no one had any objections this time, not even Fitzwilliam P. Dalton III. And that is the end of this book. So just to recap there, everything that had been turned to bronze now turned to silver because of the silver gem being placed into the amulet. Along with Jack's tooth, which had been turned to bronze in the last book, if you remember, and it is now silver. So you might see where we're going with this, especially since the next book is titled The City of Gold. It is the finale of this second story arc of the Young Jack Sparrow series. So it's a really fun one, and I cannot wait to talk about it. I'm so excited, so I hope you'll join me on the next episode. But anyway, thank you so much for rating or reviewing the podcast wherever you listen. It really means so much to me, especially right now. Thank you so much even for just listening to this episode. And an even bigger thanks to those who have messaged me or emailed me their pirate stories and memories over the past almost 2 years of this podcast. Like, seriously, you have no idea how much that means to me. Like, to think that there are so many of you guys out there who love Pirates of the Caribbean as much as I do. Like, I never thought that I'd find, like, the community like this and find these people that love pirates as much as I do. So it fills me with joy to do this podcast and to talk with all of you and just love Pirates of the Caribbean. It's the best. So thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time for Book 7, The City of Gold. Take care. Podcast of the Caribbean is in no way affiliated with Disney. If you want to send me an email or a question, you can send it over to podcastofthecaribbean@gmail.com. You can also follow this podcast on Instagram @podcastofthecaribbean and over on Twitter /X @podcastpotc. I post fun content and trivia over there. Make sure to go check those platforms out. But be sure to keep a weather eye on the horizon. And always remember, dead men tell no tales.